20 years ago, on a freezing, wind-whipped night in West Texas, sisters Nora and Emily Hale vanished without a trace from Odessa Station, leaving their family drowned in silent grief. Authorities immediately suspected the night shift station employee, who was on duty at the exact critical moment, but with no bodies, no cameras, and only a handful of vague clues, the investigation quickly stalled. Yet for 2 full decades, their parents never gave up hope, clinging to every tiny detail that suggested their daughters were still out there somewhere. Then one day, as the old storage warehouse was being demolished, an object hidden for decades suddenly surfaced, revealing a detail neither investigators nor the Odessa community had ever considered, a detail powerful enough to upend the entire case. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you love cases like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The night of October 1999 settled over Odessa Station, with the dry, bone-chilling cold typical of West Texas. The yellowish lights strung along the platform cast a weak glow onto the concrete, making everything look like it was slowly being swallowed by darkness. The eastern parking lot was nearly empty, just a few dust-covered cars sitting motionless under gusts that carried fine sand in from the desert's edge. The abandoned tracks stretched out into an endless black void, so cold and desolate it felt like one more step would send you falling into nothingness. Nora and Emily Hale finished their late shift, pushed open the staff room door, and stepped outside with the familiar exhaustion of a long day. They exchanged a few quiet words, locked up, and pulled their jackets tighter as the night wind whipped down the corridor. A handful of lingering workers caught a fleeting glimpse of the 2 women walking along the eastern platform, their footsteps echoing steadily, heels clicking lightly against the concrete walls. As they passed the north storage area, the old metal door let out a sharp clang whenever a strong gust hit it, but the sisters only glanced over briefly to confirm it was just the wind, then kept walking. No one heard screaming. No one saw them arguing or meeting anyone. No witness saw them leave in a vehicle or board any form of transportation. They simply disappeared from sight, as if the darkness had swallowed both sisters whole, right in what should have been the safest place at that hour. The station slowly emptied, the last employees left, the automatic lights dimmed, leaving only a few trembling strips of light flickering in the wind. Silence draped the area like a thick, heavy blanket, so complete that even the banging of the wind against the metal door echoed from far away. As the night grew later, Emily's and Nora's phones went unanswered. Call after call from their parents rang into empty static. Worry turned to unease, then to outright fear when neither daughter could be reached. The parents drove to Odessa Station, stepped into an area already almost completely dark, and immediately felt something was wrong. The platform was unnaturally empty, the walkways ice cold, with no sign the sisters had ever left the premises. After several futile minutes of shouting their names, they stood in the middle of the platform, staring at the deserted parking lot, while the wind blew past, carrying the spine-chilling certainty that something terrible had happened. In that moment, they decided to call the police. When the missing persons call reached the Odessa Police Department dispatch, it was already past midnight. Within minutes, red and blue lights flashed rhythmically across the station's glass surfaces. The first patrol car turned into the main entrance, rolling slowly over the sand-speckled concrete, making the oppressive silence feel even heavier under the strobing lights. 2 officers stepped out, their car doors slammed shut with a boom that reverberated through the vast empty space. They headed straight to the platform, where the Hale family waited, anxious, dazed and grasping for anything to hold on to. Following standard rapid response protocol, the officers first asked the family to step back a safe distance and began visually scanning the scene. Odessa Station looked exactly as it had when the sisters vanished. Everything in place, yet the wrongness hung in the air, like the smell of cold, damp metal. The wind still gusted in long waves, dragging fine streaks of sand across the platform like fleeting shadows. The overhead lights stayed on, but many bulbs were so weak, they flickered, giving the impression the whole platform was breathing on its own. The officers began sweeping the area, walking slowly along the tracks, crouching low to check for anything that might have been dropped, a scrap of paper, a personal item, Footprints, drag marks, nothing. No signs of a struggle, no dropped objects, no scratches, no fabric scraps, not even an unusually deep shoe print. Everything was so clean, so perfect, so indifferent, it didn't feel like the scene of a double disappearance at all. They switched on flashlights and probed every dark corner. Along the eastern corridor, the yellow lights threw long shadows on the walls, but nothing moved. One officer paused when he noticed the door to the maintenance hallway, which should always be locked after shift, was slightly ajar. No pry marks, no smudges or scratches around the lock, just ajar. As if someone had passed through and left it that way. He flagged it, not evidence yet, but definitely irregular. They moved on to the staff room. The wooden door swung open to reveal the pale white glow of a still-on fluorescent tube, a shift schedule pinned to the wall, a few personal notes, an old swivel chair, and a metal locker. Nothing disturbed, nothing suggesting the sisters left in a hurry or in fear. Everything was so tidy it felt deliberately preserved. One officer opened the locker, spare jackets, and an old maintenance toolbox. No wallets, no keys, nothing belonging to the victims left behind. No sign anyone had tried to take or hide anything. Another officer checked the electrical panel for why some lights in the north warehouse were flickering oddly, but everything read normal. No exposed wires, no blown fuses. The lights were failing, but not naturally, as if someone had tampered with the lighting system earlier and been careful not to leave traces. Leaving the staff room, the officers headed to the eastern parking lot, the last place Nora and Emily had been seen. The lot was deserted, only a few scattered cars coated in a thin film of sand. The strong wind still whistled through the metal fence. One officer swept his flashlight between and crouched under each vehicle, looking for the tiniest clue. Again, nothing. No clear footprints, no keys, nothing dropped. Texas night wind can move sand, but it can't erase everything. The emptiness was unnatural and frightening. Nearly an hour after the search began, the officers returned to the platform where the Hale family waited. Their confusion was obvious, not from finding something horrific, but from finding nothing at all. No leads, no traces, as if the two women had never been there. One officer spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully, suggesting maybe the sisters had left with someone or gone somewhere unknown. The family immediately insisted that was impossible, and as the officers took down initial information for the report, the entire platform sank once more into thick silence, broken only by the wind banging the warehouse door like a warning. The preliminary search ended with no answers, but it left the first responders with a distinct feeling. Something about Odessa Station that night was wrong. They just didn't yet know what to call it. The official investigation began there. The next morning, as the sun crested the scorched West Texas horizon, early light flooded Odessa Station, creating a stark contrast between the previous night's cold and the rising heat. Gravel crunched under the officers' boots as they returned to the eastern parking lot to continue the search. The night wind had died down, but thick dust still coated the concrete, painting everything pale yellow like ash. And right in the middle of that space, beneath a metal light pole that had been off for hours, sat Nora Hale's silver Honda Accord, perfectly still, like a forgotten corner of the world. No one wanted to believe the car was still there. In the Hale family's minds, Nora always drove, an unchanging habit for years. Whenever the sisters went anywhere together, she was behind the wheel. So seeing the car exactly where it had been parked sent their dread soaring. You could almost hear it in the way they held their breath. An officer stepped close, crouched to check the plate against the family's description, and nodded. "It's Nora's car." The Honda wasn't crooked, no tire marks suggesting it had been moved, no fresh scratches or pry marks on the doors. From the outside it looked like any car left overnight at a quiet station, ordinary, calm, revealing nothing about what had happened just hours earlier. But that very normalcy made the entire search team uneasy. One missing person might leave traces. Two missing together should leave more. Here, aside from the even layer of dust on the hood, nothing had changed. When the doors were opened, the familiar mix of smells wafted out: old leather, faint women's perfume, and the sharp dryness of a Texas night. On the back seat lay a canvas bag, some of Nora's work notes, and an open box of tissues. The cup holder held an empty water bottle. The door pocket was closed, containing a small notebook and a furniture store membership card. On the passenger seat was Emily's neatly folded denim jacket, the one she wore when it got cold. Nothing important was missing. Their purses weren't in the car because both women always carried them, but beyond that there were no signs they'd been snatched or yanked away. What caught the second officer's attention most was the car key. It lay loose in the small tray near the gear shift, not in the ignition, and not hidden. Nora was extremely careful. She never left keys in the car without reason. And if the sisters had driven away in the Honda, the key would be with her, or already in the ignition, not tossed casually into the tray like that. This wasn't Nora's habit. It didn't even feel like the behavior of any woman leaving a late shift alone at night in an empty station. One officer sat in the driver's seat to get a feel for it, and immediately noticed the second, far more significant anomaly. The driver's seat was pushed all the way back. Completely wrong for Nora, according to the family. Nora was almost 8 inches shorter than the officer. At this setting she could barely reach the gas pedal. Plus, the seat back was reclined farther, as if the driver wanted a longer sightline or was unusually tall. This wasn't Nora driving, it wasn't Emily, and very likely it wasn't any woman. The anomaly made no sense. No signs of forced entry, meaning the car was opened legally, either by someone with a key or by the owner herself. But if someone else adjusted the seat, how did they get in? Why leave no trace? And why move the seat at all without taking anything? One officer removed his sunglasses and closely examined the dashboard. No oily fingerprints, no wiped dust streaks, no smudges on the gear shift, but the driver's seat, the detail easiest to overlook, was the clearest evidence of behavior. Someone sat in this car, and that someone was not either sister. When they checked the rear, they noticed the dust on the back window was lightly disturbed, as if someone had placed a hand there to peer inside, then quickly pulled away. No clear handprint, but enough disturbance to show movement. Texas dust is thick and dry, yet sensitive enough to record small actions. An officer stepped back several paces to take in the whole lot from a wider angle. The Honda sat dead center, strangely peaceful, and that very peacefulness made the disappearance even harder to accept. No items abandoned, no papers dropped, no unusual footprints, no signs of struggle, just the car, an inanimate object, standing as the only proof the two women had existed before they stepped into an unexplained void. The preliminary search was only beginning, but the Honda Accord had already revealed what no one wanted to admit. The Hale sisters did not leave the station willingly, and someone had been inside that car after they vanished. Who, how, and why? Those questions hung in the empty parking lot, waiting to be answered. As the search team expanded their sweep, they moved toward an area every longtime Odessa Station employee knew, but rarely entered. The North Warehouse, the section the main lights never reached, the same area the sisters had walked past before disappearing. Morning was advancing, yet the tall concrete walls still cast shadows that kept the place colder than the station, as if it had trapped the breath of the previous night. The fine sand on the cement floor showed almost no fresh footprints, only a few blurred smears the wind had already softened. Impossible to identify shape or direction. The big metal door to the North Warehouse, the one that had clanged lonely in the night, stood motionless in the calm morning. An officer placed a hand on the ice-cold surface and pushed gently. The door swung inward with almost no resistance, still just ajar, exactly as it had been seen hours earlier, but now silent without the wind to slam it. The old hinges groaned with a long dry creak like rusted metal waking up. No pry marks, no deformation around the lock. The door hadn't been forced, it simply wasn't locked, and that was against every procedure, especially after the night shift. Inside the warehouse, flashlight beams swept across wooden crates, pallets, and rows of old metal containers that appeared untouched for months. No crates pushed out of place, no obvious disturbance in the dust. But what made the team pause longest wasn't the inventory. It was the air, compressed, heavier, gloomier than outside, as if sound itself refused to travel in this space. One officer walked deeper, shining his light between the stacks. Nothing, he said, then stopped. In the western corner where light barely reached, a strip of cement floor along the wall looked slightly different in color from the rest. Not wet, not dust-covered, just off, as if something had once rested there but was removed long before the team arrived. Nothing conclusive, but worth noting. Leaving the warehouse, they moved to the maintenance corridor, a place passengers never noticed. It was a narrow passage connecting the north warehouse to the old electrical systems, sandwiched between thick concrete walls, almost 100 feet long and dark as a tunnel. The faint smell of old oil and damp metal rose from the floor, mixing with the general dustiness of the aging station. The ceiling lights were already weak. In morning they created an unpleasant contrast, outside light too weak to penetrate, while the corridor bulbs flickered constantly because of outdated wiring. When they pushed open the door, one officer frowned. The corridor lights were on, which went against how the station operated. Those lights only came on when someone entered, or when maintenance was working. But the Hale sisters' shift had ended hours earlier, and no one had reported working here. Police noted it, not jumping to conclusions, just another loose thread, another irregularity in what should have been one of the station's safest zones. Underfoot, dust was so thick every step left a hazy print, but the naked eye couldn't distinguish old from new. Overnight wind had blown hard across the platform, and likely pushed some dust through the slightly open door. West Texas dust follows no clear rules, making trace evidence here even harder to read. At the far end of the corridor was another metal door leading to a little-known area, an old service stairwell down beneath the station foundation. It had once been used to move equipment and access electrical systems in the 1970s, but it had long been abandoned. No one paid much attention to it anymore, except the occasional maintenance worker checking cables to make sure rats hadn't chewed through them. When the officers pulled that door open, a damp, indescribable chill welled up from below, not cold in temperature, but the unmistakable heavy dampness of an old space no one had entered in years. A narrow, rusted staircase descended into deep darkness. The lights down there didn't work. An officer aimed his flashlight downward. The concrete floor at the bottom was coated in dust, but there were no clear footprints, just a thick, empty void, so silent the beam of light itself seemed to get sucked into it. They found nothing concrete, no torn fabric, no personal items or signs of a struggle, but the very existence of this old unlocked escape route started raising questions in their minds. Could someone have come through here? Could the sisters have been led, or walked into this area without anyone seeing, or was it simply a forgotten exit that happened to be open on the exact night everything went wrong? Even without specific traces, the something's off feeling the first responders had sensed the night before grew stronger once they finished checking every dead zone in the station. Everything was silent, clean, and showed no obvious signs of criminal activity, yet at the same time offered zero logical explanation for how two grown women could vanish from a station with multiple exits, lit areas, and people still coming and going until the end of the shift. The officers stood in the shadow of the north warehouse, looking over the entire area they'd just swept. The warehouse, the maintenance corridor, the old service stairwell, everything was normal in an artificial way. Not clues, not evidence, just subtle irregularities hanging in the air, as if someone had crafted the perfect cover so nothing would look like anything had happened at all. And that very emptiness became more alarming than any trace could have been. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't what's left behind, it's when there's nothing left to follow. As the search expanded across the entire station grounds, police began collecting statements from everyone who had been at or near Odessa Station the previous evening. At first everyone assumed witness accounts would help narrow down the window when the Hale sisters disappeared, but within just a few hours, the investigators realized something even more troubling than having no physical evidence. The witnesses completely contradicted one another. No two stories matched. The first witness was a middle-aged night taxi driver, who usually waited for fares across from the eastern parking lot. He said he saw two female figures leave the staff room and walk toward the platform, exactly as the family had described. But he added one new detail that made the officers stop writing. According to him, a few minutes after the sisters walked away, he saw a man carrying a gray duffel bag walking in the opposite direction. He was moving fast, the man said firmly. Didn't look at the girls, didn't hail a cab, but he was definitely heading straight toward the warehouse area. I noticed because hardly anyone goes that way at that hour. Police wrote it down carefully, but the detail didn't line up with anything else they had. No one else mentioned this man. No camera captured anyone matching that description, and most importantly, nobody else saw the duffel bag. The second witness was an older woman who lived near the tracks and walked her dog every evening. She said she saw two girls walking with a man in a dark jacket near the north warehouse as she passed by. All three seemed to be talking, she recalled. I couldn't hear anything because of the wind, but it didn't look like an argument. It looked like they knew each other. Police immediately asked her to elaborate. Knew each other, she repeated. Nothing looked forced. That was almost the exact opposite of the taxi driver's story. One said the sisters were alone. The other said they were with a man. One insisted there was a duffel bag. The other saw nothing but the two women and a male figure. Two completely conflicting accounts forced investigators to wonder, was the disappearance witnessed by multiple people, each only catching a disconnected fragment, or was someone accidentally, or deliberately, covering up a critical detail? The third witness confused police the most. He was a worker from a nearby warehouse, finishing the evening shift, who said he walked past the platform area on his way home. He insisted he saw two women, matching Nora and Emily's descriptions, walking straight toward the eastern parking lot, not turning into the warehouse, not stopping to talk to anyone. Nobody was following them, he said with certainty. I saw them from a distance. There was no one else on the platform at that moment. That contradicted both previous statements. The first saw a man walking the opposite way. The second saw a man walking with them. The third was positive, only the two sisters. One officer sighed as he set down his pen. 3 statements, 3 different versions, and worse, each version had enough internal logic that none could be dismissed outright. But the chaos in the witness statements wasn't over. When investigators went back to the taxi driver for more details, especially about the direction the man with the duffel bag was heading, something shocking happened. The man was no longer at the address he'd given. They went to the spot where he said he waited for fares. No one knew who he was. Then they checked the temporary address in his statement. The door was locked. Neighbors said, "We've never seen anyone like that living here." A witness vanished right after giving a statement. No one was saying it was proof of a crime yet, but everyone agreed it wasn't normal. The lead officer immediately noted, identity verification required, but with no real name, no taxi license plate, no company information. The man had stood there like a stranger in the night, appeared to give a statement, and then disappeared as if he'd never existed. This forced police to reevaluate all 3 accounts. There was no physical evidence to cross-check, no camera footage to support any version, nothing to confirm which witness, if any, was most reliable. All 3 were just disconnected fragments without foundation, contradicting one another so severely, they couldn't be pieced into a coherent picture. With the warehouse door ajar, corridor lights on against protocol, driver's seat adjusted wrong, and now 3 irreconcilable witness statements, the first response team understood the Hale sisters' disappearance was not a simple event, but at this preliminary stage, they had no authority to speculate too far. They could only document everything, compile it, and hope that when all the information was laid side by side, a real lead would emerge. But no lead emerged. Only 3 different stories, each telling a truth no one could guarantee was the right one. And in the middle of that mess, one other truth became clear. That night at Odessa Station, it wasn't just the Hale sisters and a few passers-by. There had been more than one witness, more than one stranger, and possibly more than one person involved. But at that moment, police still didn't know where to start, and that, as one officer wrote, was scarier than having no witnesses at all. As witness statements descended into chaos, mismatched, vague, and one person even gone, police were forced to turn to the only thing more objective than human perception, the station's operational logs. Though Odessa Station wasn't a major hub like Houston or Dallas, every train that passed through that night, passenger or freight, had its own code, exact arrival and departure times, and reason for stopping, all recorded according to Texas rail system standards. Pulling the train schedule, for rookie officers, was usually just procedural busy work. But for the team facing an unsolved disappearance, those seemingly dry lines could be the only piece still holding perfect accuracy, amid three contradictory witness accounts. They needed one solid fact, something to stand on, before the case spiraled further. The schedule for the night of October 11, 1999 was printed on thermal paper, rolled up in the night supervisor's desk drawer. An officer unrolled it, laid it on the table, and began reading line by line. The log showed 3 passenger trains that evening, and 6 freight trains passing through the area. All times matched system data. The Midland, Odessa passenger train arrived at 9 p.m., departed 10 minutes later, an El Paso through train with no stop, and several freight trains hauling construction materials or fuel that rolled past without stopping. On paper, the night had been completely routine, and that was exactly what made it abnormal. A veteran officer ran his finger down each line, eyes moving slowly. Everything was perfectly aligned, clear, by the book. Then, at the very bottom of the page, he stopped. There was a handwritten entry in blue ink, not printed by the system, code 732A, 2217, no description, no origin or destination, no notes, just a single pencil line, sitting alone beneath the official schedule. "What train is 732A?" he asked the night supervisor standing nearby. The supervisor shook his head. "I don't know, I've never seen that code." The team immediately checked the station's computer system. They searched for 732A, nothing in the internal database. They cross-checked Union Pacific records, nothing. They called the Midland, El Paso Regional Dispatch. No train with that code passed through Odessa at that time. One officer frowned. "Then why did someone write it on the schedule?" The night supervisor thought for a few seconds and answered, "Only 2 possibilities. Either someone wrote it by mistake, or a train went through that isn't on the list." The room went quiet for several seconds, not because it was dramatic, but because that possibility wasn't simple. An unregistered or improperly logged train is a serious violation. The Texas rail system runs tight, especially at night. A train passing through without appearing in the system could be a technical glitch or something far more concerning. They printed the full signal controller data. Long black ink lines showed the status for each track segment. When a train passed, the signal logged it with a distinct code. The officers scanned every line, marking matches with the printed schedule. Then near the end they found a heavy load signal on track 2, just after 10 p.m., the exact time the Hale sisters were last seen. That signal corresponded to a train, but the system recorded no train ID, no car count, no code, just the basic indication that a heavy object had passed over track 2. Not a passenger train, the tech officer noted. Passenger trains have a different, more sensitive signal. This looks like freight, but incomplete. No code, no record. No one knew which company it belonged to, where it came from, or where it was going. No one knew who authorized it to use the line, an appearance that was, on paper, completely invisible. And the part that sent chills down their spines, that train passed through right when the Hale sisters disappeared. It wasn't enough to conclude the mystery train was connected to the disappearance, but it was the first solid weight lead the team had gotten since the missing persons call came in. Not a vague statement, not a gut feeling, but actual data, an event the system recorded, that existed, and did not match the official schedule. A huge question mark formed. Did someone run an unregistered train through Odessa Station the night 2 women vanished? If so, the story was no longer just 2 women finishing their shift and disappearing. It opened the possibility that their disappearance happened against the backdrop of unauthorized activity right on the tracks, activity someone had deliberately kept off the books. One officer opened the signal log again, searching for any further indication of the train's direction. Unfortunately, the 1999 system didn't store full directional data like later upgrades. They had only one line: heavy load moving west to east, unknown speed, unknown train length. The team now faced a choice: treat this as equipment error and risk wasting hours, or treat it as a real piece of the case. If it was the latter, that ghost train might be the only key to understanding what happened to Nora and Emily. By late morning, before leaving the signal control room, one officer wrote the only line under the report section: critical details requiring verification. Unregistered train recorded passing through at approximately 10 p.m. Origin, unknown. Reason for presence unknown. And for the first time since the disappearance began, they felt they finally had a real thread, thin, fragile, and hard to follow, but the first thread strong enough to pull the entire case in a completely different direction. Once the train schedule revealed the possible existence of an unregistered train, the search team returned to the parking lot and tracks with a new focus, no longer general sweeps, but hunting for the smallest traces that might have been missed in the initial chaotic night search. Mid-morning West Texas sun beat down on the hot concrete, making the whole area brighter, sharper, and details hidden in darkness now began to show subtler clues. A young officer crouched low to the ground, eyes scanning the thin layer of dust on the pavement. At first he saw nothing unusual beyond the curved streaks left by the previous night's wind. Then, about 30 feet from Nora's Honda Accord, he stopped. On the concrete was a faint curved mark, not perfectly round like the tires of regular sedans or SUVs. The mark stretched about 12 feet long, narrow as if made by smaller tires, and most importantly, the tread pattern didn't match any common tire type in the Odessa area at that time. When he marked it with a stick, another officer walked over, and both crouched down to examine it longer. It wasn't a clear tire mark, not sharp, not deep enough to pinpoint exact tire size, but there was enough shape to see that it didn't match any of the vehicles currently parked in the lot. And since the dust layer was still fairly thick, that mark most likely appeared within the last 12 to 24 hours, meaning the exact window when Nora and Emily vanished. Not the Honda, not a street Ford or Chevy, the tech officer concluded. Could be an older model, or something not common around here. An older officer crossed his arms. Industrial vehicle, or something not fully registered. No one dared confirm, but every pair of eyes stared at that curved mark a few seconds longer, as if trying to force it to say something it couldn't. Continuing to sweep the parking lot, they found another mark, a thin skid line cutting across the dust layer, stretching from the edge of the parking area, almost to the north warehouse. This one didn't look like a tire track, it looked like the trace of something dragged or pushed along the ground. It wasn't deep or sharp, but there was enough displaced sand pushed to both sides, forming small grooves. The width wasn't large, could be from a small crate, a suitcase, or even a personal item, but it ran nearly 60 feet before abruptly disappearing, where the concrete was cleaner and stronger winds had erased everything. Could just be the wind blowing something last night, one officer offered, voice uncertain. The wind dragging something 60 feet, the younger officer replied, half skeptical, half probing. No one answered. No one wanted to turn a faint drag mark in the dust into case evidence, but no one could deny the truth. The mark led straight toward the north warehouse, the same area where the door had been ajar, and the corridor lights were on against protocol. When they followed the drag mark to where it vanished, they noticed something else that heightened suspicion. Right at the property line, near the rusted metal fence, the surface changed from concrete to natural sand, and the previous night's wind had almost perfectly leveled everything. If anyone or anything had crossed that transition zone, the wind had done its job, erasing everything humans wanted to find. One officer clicked on his flashlight and shone it under the bottom rail of the fence, even though it was daylight. Dust had piled up beneath the metal bar, no heavy disturbance, but there was a small patch that looked lightly stirred, as if someone or something had brushed through. Not enough to confirm, but impossible to ignore. Every detail was frustratingly small, yet they all lined up in a chain the team couldn't dismiss: wrong adjusted driver's seat, unlocked warehouse door, corridor lights on improperly, contradictory witness statements, and now a strange tire mark, plus a drag line in the sand. A veteran officer took one step back and scanned the whole scene. Normally, when you've got a suspicious tire mark, he said slowly, you'll also have footprints, debris, clearer drag marks, but here nothing lines up. It's like whoever did this knew exactly what to do to leave no trace, except the things wind can't completely erase. Maybe it was just a feeling built from a string of tiny disconnected details, but the feeling grew clearer. The area around the parking lot, was not where the sisters simply walked away normally. A younger officer suddenly asked, "What about tire marks from the unregistered train? Would it have left anything along the tracks?" The question made the whole group pause. No one had thought that the mystery train, if it really existed, might have left traces on the ground beside the parking lot, or near the rails. But when they walked to the edge of track 2, and looked down at the sand running parallel to the rails, they quickly realized, nothing obvious. If a train had passed, only wind and vibration were certain, but everything else, dust, small rocks, had returned to a natural state. One officer exhaled. "This makes everything worse. One drag mark, and one strange tire mark, not much, but enough to make me think something happened between the parking lot and the north warehouse. Still no concrete evidence, still nothing strong enough to escalate upward." But the first physical traces, however faint, marked a crucial shift. The disappearance was no longer simply two women walking into the night and never coming back. There had been unusual activity in the area. Something had been moved, and some vehicle, or piece of equipment, had been present near where Nora and Emily were last seen. No conclusion, no answer, but the first response team left the parking lot, with a clear sense that Odessa Station had not been completely silent that night, and whatever happened had left traces for anyone patient enough to find them. The appearance of those first physical traces, the strange tire mark, the long drag line through the dust, made the investigation team realize they had crossed out of ordinary search mode. The night the Hale sisters vanished was no longer just a story of unanswered phone calls and family worry. It was starting to take the shape of an organized crime, or at least an intentional act. And when a case starts leaning that way, the first thing police have to do isn't guess what happened, it's figure out who could be involved. At the most basic level of investigation, the initial suspect list in a disappearance always includes 4 groups: acquaintances, station employees, truck drivers and area workers, and passengers passing through during the critical window. But each group has different characteristics and capabilities. Each has different motives, opportunities, and ways of approaching the victims, and in cases with almost no physical evidence and contradictory witness statements, the suspect list has to rely more on behavior than proof. Acquaintances, the most natural suspect group in any disappearance. The Hale sisters didn't have many complicated relationships. Nora lived fairly privately, mostly working at a furniture restoration shop. Emily was more social, knew lots of people at the station, and often chatted with passengers, truckers, and night security. The family immediately provided a list of everyone who had appeared in either sister's life: close friends, co-workers, ex-boyfriends, long-term customers. Acquaintances are always checked first, because many disappearances have personal roots. Investigators filtered the list by 3 criteria: who had any conflict with either sister, who had been seen near the station in recent months, who could approach Nora and Emily without raising alarm. Quick filtering showed no one in this group, at that point, had a history of violence or obvious red flags. But nothing obvious didn't mean they were cleared. Station employees, the group with the greatest opportunity. This group was especially critical. Only people who worked at the station would know which doors were easy to open, which were supposed to be locked but last night weren't, where cameras were weak, which shortcuts led to the warehouse, which old exits connected to abandoned tracks, and as in many cases involving stations or industrial sites, those with legitimate access are sometimes the ones best able to hide criminal behavior. Investigators reviewed the roster of evening and morning shift employees. Some were present that night, some left before Nora and Emily finished their shift. One maintenance worker, according to statements, left a little early because he wasn't feeling well, but no one could verify exactly when he left. Another employee couldn't clearly remember what he did during the last 30 minutes of his shift. His explanation was tired, and just wanted to get home. No one in the employee group had evidence against them, but everyone had something a little loose. Truck drivers and area workers, the highly mobile group. Odessa Station wasn't busy at night, but surrounding it were warehouses and freight routes. Plenty of drivers stopped to rest, walked the lot, or went into the waiting area for water. They're the hardest suspect group to track, because they're not there regularly. Many aren't local. Vehicle entry exit records, in 1999 were incomplete. The witness statement about a man with a gray duffel bag made this group even more noteworthy. There was no proof the man was a trucker, but the fast walk, unfamiliar face, and fact no one recognized him as staff all raised flags. Another factor that kept this group open: many freight drivers had irregular schedules, sometimes swapped routes or trucks mid-run, making identity verification complicated. Passengers, the broadest and hardest to pin down group. Passengers were the largest pool and the toughest to grasp. In the hours around the disappearance, a passenger train from Midland arrived. Some people got off, some just stopped for water and left immediately. Regular witnesses wouldn't remember any faces, and no surviving camera footage was clear enough for identification. What made the passenger group potential suspects was they could approach the victims without suspicion. They could leave the station instantly by train or personal vehicle. They're extremely hard to trace afterward. But this wasn't just categorizing people. Investigators also applied common psychological profiles used in no-trace disappearances. Opportunistic offenders, people who act on impulse if they spot an opening. This could be a stranger, a homeless person sleeping around the station, or someone who just happened to be there at the right moment. Fixated offenders, usually someone who knew the victims and had been watching them for a while. A co-worker who worked with Emily, an old acquaintance of Nora's, or a difficult customer, could fit. Situationally informed offenders, the most frightening in a station setting. People who know every doorway, escape route, light timer and camera blind spot. Someone like that could make victims vanish while leaving almost no trace. Finally, transient offenders, truck drivers, random passengers, non-locals. This group rarely offends at stations, but when they do, they're nearly impossible to catch. After several hours, an open suspect list was formed. No one was fully crossed off. No one was declared completely innocent. Names, descriptions, and gaps in alibis were written line by line, reordered by level of opportunity and access to the Hale sisters. The case was ready to move past the search in every direction phase. From this point on, the team knew they had to start seriously narrowing the real suspect pool. People who were at Odessa Station that night, or who had enough opportunity to make two women disappear without a trace. And the scariest part, the list didn't shrink. It grew, expanding with every new piece of information, every inconsistent statement, every faint physical trace. From a disappearance, it was starting to look like a case where everyone within a few miles of Odessa Station that night could be a piece of the puzzle. Just as the suspect list was growing almost unmanageable, and the team was trying to categorize each group, a new tip came into dispatch that sent everything spinning in a completely different direction. Mid-afternoon, a woman called from Midland, less than 30 miles from Odessa, saying she was almost certain she had seen Nora Hale at a convenience store near Highway 191. Those simple words made the investigation room go quiet for several seconds. After hours of finding nothing, 3 contradictory witness statements, and 1 highly irregular unregistered train, any report of one of the sisters being seen alive could flip the entire investigation. The search could shift from looking for clues to tracking living people, and in the critical early hours of a disappearance, that's what police hope for most. According to the woman, Nora walked into the store a little after 1 p.m. wearing a black baseball cap and a light-colored denim jacket, very similar to the one Emily had left in the car, making the detail even more striking. She spoke very little, bought a bottle of water, and left. The woman also described Nora as looking hurried, and kept glancing out the window like she was afraid someone was following her. The team immediately dispatched a rapid response unit to Midland, requested the store's security footage, and sent detailed victim descriptions to local police. Hope, thin but real, flared up. If Nora was in Midland, Emily might be nearby too, and if both had left the station willingly, the case might not be a serious crime, but a voluntary disappearance, or hiding. But that hope started crumbling the moment Midland police opened the store's archived footage. The equipment was too old, and that day's recording was blurry, nowhere near clear enough for facial identification. Everything now rested on the woman's account. She sat waiting in the employee break room, clutching her purse tightly, face serious but unable to hide a slight waver. An experienced officer sat across from her and asked, "Are you certain it was Nora Hale? Had you ever met her before?" The woman shook her head. "I only saw her picture on the news this morning. The hair was exactly the same. The face looked like her. Like her is a dangerous phrase in investigations. It isn't identification. It isn't evidence. It's just a feeling. But when someone is missing, that feeling can send an entire force down the wrong path." Despite the hesitation, the team still spent the next 3 hours combing the store, nearby gas stations, restaurants, even asking every employee if they recognized the described woman. Several said they might have seen someone who looked similar, but no one remembered exactly, and no one had solid proof. By late afternoon, the search hit a dead end. No Nora, no Emily, no evidence they had ever been in Midland. Just one solitary account from a worried woman who had watched the news. However, because of the case's sensitivity, investigators couldn't dismiss the tip on suspicion alone. They expanded the search to Midland suburbs, set up checkpoints on major routes, even stationed officers in areas the victims might pass through if trying to leave West Texas. 3 days passed like that, 3 days in which the team poured resources, manpower, time, and mental energy into chasing the ghost of an unverified tip. Constant searches, constantly updated boards on the wall, descriptions broadcast to every store and gas station along the highways, but everything came back to zero. And most importantly, while the team chased the Midland lead, they had to reduce time spent back at Odessa Station, where the real, though tiny clues were emerging. One particularly memorable moment happened on the evening of the third day. A young officer, who had been searching non-stop for 3 days, leaned against the patrol car watching the Texas sunset bleed gray-red across the sky. He shook his head and said quietly to his partner, "I've got a feeling we're chasing something that isn't there," and he was right. That same evening, the woman from Midland called dispatch again, voice shaking. She admitted she was no longer sure, that maybe the person just looked like Nora, or maybe I got too worried after watching the news. Those honest words were like a bucket of cold water on 3 days of effort. When investigators officially entered into the report, no evidence confirming Nora Hale's presence in Midland, they knew they had just lost 3 precious days, 3 days they could have spent thoroughly searching the warehouse, the tracks, and the station employee list. 3 days isn't much in a lifetime, but in a no-trace disappearance, 3 days is an eternity. And that waste made Odessa Station look even more ominous than before. If Nora wasn't in Midland, if the witness was wrong, if it was all just a trick of memory, then the only question left was, where did the sisters go, and who made them vanish from that station in absolute silence? The 3 days sucked into the Midland lead didn't just exhaust the investigation team, they also forced them to face an unsettling reality. After a full week since the night the Hale sisters vanished, everything they had was still just vague irregularities. When they returned to Odessa Station to pick up the work, those scattered details, the unlocked warehouse door, the corridor lights left on wrong, the driver's seat pushed back, the strange tire mark, the drag line in the sand, were all still exactly where they'd been, but none were strong enough to point to a clear investigative direction. The absence of security cameras was the heaviest blow. In 1999, Odessa Station only had a handful of outdated cameras covering administration and the ticket area, while the places Nora and Emily were last seen, the eastern platform, the north warehouse, the maintenance corridor, were completely outside their view. When the tech team reviewed every tape, they saw only grainy, noisy footage, patchy light and fleeting shadows, but absolutely no image capturing the sisters' final steps. No cameras, no audio, no one filming that night. They disappeared in the one place that had no eyes on it. The physical clues couldn't be pushed any further either. The strange tire mark wasn't sharp enough to identify the vehicle type. The faint drag line in the sand only proved that something or someone had been moved, but not direction, timing, or perpetrator. The old service stairwell had no footprints, no fabric fibers, no personal items. The maintenance corridor was so dark and dusty that any trace could have been wiped out by wind within hours. The witnesses, instead of helping, only made the case more tangled. 3 statements, 3 completely different versions, none matching, none tying to any physical evidence. The taxi witness vanished. The Midland woman admitted she might have been mistaken, and the warehouse worker ultimately only saw 2 figures from a distance, unable to provide anything more useful. Police mobilized searches along both sides of the tracks, but those lines stretched dozens of miles through barren, sun-scorched land. No bodies, no discarded belongings, no signs of a fall or struggle. Even finding a scrap of paper or an earring felt like a luxury. No bodies, meaning no crime, could be confirmed. No clear physical evidence, meaning no investigative direction could be set. No signs of voluntary departure, meaning every possibility stayed open, but none were solid enough to pursue. In the internal report, the lead investigator wrote 3 points in bold: 1. Insufficient physical evidence to establish criminal activity. 2. No evidence the victims left the area voluntarily. 3. No standout suspect on the open list. All 3 points were accurate, and all 3 pushed the case into a near-stalled state. In the days that followed, the team started looping, re-interviewing the same old witnesses, researching the same already checked areas, re-watching the blurry tapes they knew wouldn't reveal anything new, trying to find logic in details that refused to connect. But the more they repeated, the clearer it became. The case had hit the limit of what traditional investigation could achieve. By the end of week 2, Nora and Emily's photos kept appearing on local news, but every segment ended with the same line: no significant developments. The Hale family watched the officers leave the platform for the last time in the initial search phase, unaware that this was also when the team faced its hardest decision to suspend the active investigation. Not because they wanted to give up, not because they believed the sisters were gone forever, but because there was simply nothing left to investigate. The file was moved to pending follow-up, awaiting new information. Officers pulled out of the scene. The station returned to normal operations, though no one there ever looked at the platform the same way again. The place where 2 women vanished stayed cold and empty, as if frozen in the state of that night. In its first weeks, the Nora and Emily Hale case reached no conclusion. It slowly drifted into silence, a silence as heavy as the windy night they disappeared. And at that moment, though no one said it out loud, everyone understood: once a file goes cold, the odds of ever solving it shrink with every passing day. Odessa Station still stood, but the 2 women never walked out of it again. 2 years after Nora and Emily Hale vanished from Odessa Station, the case file had grown thick with field reports, interview notes, train signal summaries, and pages describing faint traces that led nowhere. But time, always indifferent to human effort, kept moving, and with it the case's priority dropped in the cold, predictable way every veteran investigator knows too well. No new leads means slowdown, no direction means stop. Long enough stopped, and it goes to the cold case storage. In early 2003, almost 4 years after that night, the Odessa Police Department officially classified the Nora and Emily Hale case as a cold case. The decision wasn't a shock to the original team. They had seen it coming for months, but it still carried a bitter taste of failure. They had searched every corner of the station, every rail, every old exit, interviewed dozens of witnesses, chased every hole in the train logs, followed wrong leads and returned to square one more times than they cared to admit. Yet the case stood still. When the file was moved to cold storage, it was sealed in a thick cardboard box, labeled 99 OS 2147. Next to the number, a red stamp: inactive, pending new evidence. Not closed, but no longer a priority. The box was placed on a shelf in a room colder and darker than the offices upstairs. That was where hundreds of unsolved West Texas cases lived: murders without killers, disappearances without traces, stories that fell silent. A land as vast and wild as West Texas always has plenty of unanswered questions, and the Hale file was just one folder among hundreds without endings. In the 2003 statistics, the Hale sisters' disappearance was listed under Unresolved Missing Persons, West Texas region, sandwiched between cases from Pecos, Midland, Monahans and Andrews. By then, the region had over 100 similar open files, people who vanished from highways, train stations, small towns, or simply from their own lives. But the Hale case stood out, not because of evidence, but because of the total lack of it. No bodies, no motive to leave, no clear traces. That perfect emptiness made it unsettling, baffling, and impossible to forget. A small cold case unit took over the Hale file, mainly to review periodically and update if anything new came in. But the first months, then the first full year after it was shelved, the phone never rang. No new witnesses, no new evidence, no agency reporting sightings of the women elsewhere. No one confessing or sending anonymous letters like in personal motive cases. Everything stayed silent, silent as the night they stepped out of the staff room, leaving behind only the broken yellow light on the concrete. One officer on the cold case team wrote in the first-year review, "No significant progress, no new data to analyze. Recommend continued long-term archival status." The Hale family kept calling, kept asking, kept hoping one day the phone would ring with news of a breakthrough. Every time, the answer was the same: "We're still monitoring the case. We'll contact you if anything new comes in." The 1999 investigators, those who had stood on the windy platform that freezing night, were gradually reassigned. Some retired, some moved to new units. Those who still remembered only mentioned it when talking about one of the strangest disappearances we ever worked. And Odessa Station kept standing. People got on and off trains every day, none aware that 20 years earlier, two women had walked across the same spot and vanished into thin air. Only old-timers in the area occasionally brought it up over late-night coffee. Those two girls from back then, never found. Really strange case, not a single trace. 2003 ended with the Nora and Emily Hale file, no longer on any active investigator's desk. It sat quietly in cold storage, one unsolved case among over 100 others, and like so many disappearances in West Texas, it waited for something no one knew would ever come: a new lead, a coincidence, an accidental discovery, or someone finally deciding to speak after staying silent for years. Summer 2019, Odessa Station no longer looked like the place where the Hale sisters once worked. Years had left the building worn and deteriorated, to the point the city approved a full renovation project. The North Warehouse, the focal point of every early suspicion, had sat empty for nearly 2 decades, locked, sealed, untouched, since the Hale file went cold. In early July, a demolition crew was hired to tear down the warehouse ceiling, remove old equipment, and clear residual materials before rebuilding. They knew nothing about the 1999 disappearance. To them, it was just another old job site smelling of rot, rust and dust, so thick every footstep kicked up little clouds. On the morning of the third day, as workers pried wooden panels off the western wall, a young crew member called his co-workers over. "Hey, there's something here." His tone wasn't excited, more puzzled. Hidden in a narrow cavity between 2 wall layers, behind an old wooden panel the crew had assumed was just wall covering, was a gray object, completely coated in dust, nestled in the darkness. They pulled it out. It was a gray canvas duffel bag, thick fabric now frayed at the seams, the handle almost detached. The layer of dust showed it had been there a very long time, possibly decades, possibly placed before the youngest worker on site was even born. But what made them freeze them wasn't the bag's age, it was how deliberately it had been hidden. The bag hadn't fallen there by accident. It was pressed flat against the wall, perfectly aligned, as if someone had intentionally placed it in the cavity and then covered it with the panel. Not a rushed hide, not dropped. Hidden. The site supervisor, after seeing the bag, immediately called police. The crew didn't know the building's past, but the city did. Any unusual item found in the North Warehouse had to be treated seriously. When officers arrived, many too young to have worked the original 1999 case, They had no idea the first piece of evidence, in the Hale disappearance, was about to surface after 20 years, from behind a rotted wall no one remembered existed. The bag was placed on a makeshift wooden table, under harsh white work lights. Dust was gently blown off, revealing the gray fabric more clearly. The zipper was stuck halfway, rusted and caked. An officer in gloves tugged gently. The zipper gave a dry click, and the bag opened. Inside were 3 items. The first was a thin light blue scarf, the kind Emily often wore in early cold weather. The family had mentioned that scarf in a 1999 report, noting Emily usually carried it, but wasn't sure if she wore it the night she vanished. The scarf in the duffel wasn't new, but the color and material matched the old description perfectly. The second item made the air heavier, a metal keychain with the initials EH crudely engraved on the back. Not store-bought, handmade, the kind done at roadside Texas engraving shops. The Hale family had confirmed in an old statement that Emily owned exactly such a keychain, a gift from a high school friend. The younger officers who had never read the original file knew instantly this was no random bag. It was directly tied to Emily Hale, and it had been hidden in the north warehouse, the exact area the sisters were last seen walking past. The third item made everyone freeze for several seconds. A small piece of paper, folded 4 times, pressed flat against the bottom of the bag, yellowed with age. When unfolded with the tip of a pen tip to avoid damage, handwritten words appeared in black ink, shaky but sharp. 1029. She saw. Nothing else. Just 4 words. 1029 could be a time, a code, a meaningless number. But the final line, she saw, sent a chill down every spine. She saw. She witnessed. She discovered something. She saw someone. Police didn't jump to conclusions, but they couldn't shake the feeling that note wasn't meaningless. It felt like a rushed message, an urgent note, a warning, or a sign of desperation. The duffel held no blood, no weapon, nothing overtly violent, and that somehow made it more terrifying. It didn't spell anything out, but it placed the Hale sisters inside the north warehouse, the very place investigators had long suspected, but could never prove. The oldest officer on scene, the only one who had worked the original case, stared at the bag for a long time, then said the words everyone already felt, "We missed this in 1999. That statement carried no blame. It was simply the truth, a heavy truth. When the bag was sealed, tagged and transferred to the evidence vault, every member of the team felt the same thing. This was no longer a quiet cold case. Finding that duffel bag after nearly 20 years could not be coincidence. It wasn't random. It couldn't have been sitting there unrelated to the Hale case. And most importantly, who put it in the wall? When? Why the note she saw? And why for 20 full years had no one found it? Answers hadn't come yet, but in that moment, right in the middle of the old warehouse, under the harsh white construction lights, everyone knew the gears of a case that had been frozen for 16 years had just started turning again. One small piece of evidence, one shaky handwritten line, but for a file that had been silent for almost 2 decades, it was the first breath after years of being unable to speak. The discovery of the gray duffel bag in the old north warehouse wall cavity kept the Odessa cold case team awake for nights, but that evidence was only the first piece. When the news reached the Odessa PD archives, a tech officer, who had worked with analog equipment before the digital switchover, suddenly remembered that Odessa Station once had a 1990 model security camera removed in 2004 during the first major upgrade. When it was taken down, the camera had been reported as completely dead, won't power on, tape jammed inside. Still, per protocol, every device tied to the Hale case was sealed and stored in evidence preservation, on the slim chance it might one day matter. 16 years passed, and no one gave it another thought, until the duffel bag surfaced. One quiet afternoon, the tech officer opened the very bottom drawer of the storage room and pulled out a yellowed brown plastic box. The label was so faded only 2 words were still legible: Odessa Cam 3. He wiped off the thick dust, opened the lid, and there sat the heavy old boxy camera, its gray-silver plastic housing cracked with age. The internal mechanical gears were rusted solid, but the tape slot was intact. At the bottom of the box was a small slip, noting the seal date, June 23, 2004. Almost 20 years earlier, the officer made no promises, but he called the cold case team anyway. They set the camera on a table, turned on the lights, and removed the housing. Inside, exactly as the 2004 report stated, a small VHS tape jammed halfway in the transport mechanism. No one knew when the tape had jammed. While the camera was still running or after it stopped, no one knew what moment it had captured. But everything changed when one of the younger officers gently lifted the cassette and turned the label toward the light. On the faded sticker, in ink almost completely washed away, a few letters were still readable. North Wing, Octa 99. The room went dead silent. North Wing, the North Warehouse, the exact area Nora and Emily walked past in their final sighted moment. The VHS tape that had been stuck for nearly 2 decades was rushed to the data recovery lab. A technician experienced with analog tape carefully removed it from the mechanism, trimmed the slightly twisted leader, and ran it through a specialized cleaning unit to remove mold and dust. The tape was then loaded into an analog-to-digital converter, the same machine the lab used for anything pre-2000. When the first frame flickered onto the monitor, all they saw was heavy horizontal static, like white snow covering the screen. But after a few minutes of adjustment, the picture stabilized enough to distinguish light and dark blocks. Color was almost completely gone, leaving only the silver-gray tones typical of 1990s cameras. Everyone gathered around the screen. No one spoke. No one wanted to. Then, there was an image. Blurry, grainy, but an image. The frame showed a narrow corner of the entrance to the North Warehouse. The camera was mounted high on the wall, capturing only the upper part of the platform and the area in front of the warehouse door. The timestamp in the corner jumped between distorted characters, but a few digits were still readable. Date, October 11, 1999. The investigators looked at one another. That was the night Nora and Emily disappeared. The video ran about 20 seconds before the picture cleared slightly. Night wind blew across the platform, making dust particles sparkle under the yellow floor lights. No one in frame, just the metal door ajar, exactly the same condition the original team had documented the night of the disappearance. Around the 2-minute mark, a shadow appeared at the edge of the frame. Not a face, not a clear body, just a tall dark shape moving quickly across the right side of the screen, as if the person was very close to the camera, but only partially caught in the weak light. One officer whispered, "Someone's there." They rewound. The shadow moved from right to left, toward the warehouse door, gender impossible to determine. Height, unclear, not enough light for clothing, but the motion was unmistakable. A person. Immediately afterward, a strong vibration hit the video. The screen shook slightly, then settled. The shake could have been heavy wind or someone bumping the pole, but the timing made the team tense. The shake happened the instant the shadow vanished from frame. As the tape continued, another light appeared in the distance. Headlights, not a sedan, not a semi. Low, wide beams, flickering slightly, like old halogens. When the camera refocused a bit, the blurry shape of the vehicle emerged, a Ford Bronco, late 1980s to early 1990s model, the boxy kind common in West Texas back then. Light-colored, fairly large. But what caught the team's attention was the glow under the platform lights. Pale white, the same color mentioned in one inconsistent 1999 witness report that no one had believed because the witness couldn't remember clearly. The Bronco stopped for about 3 seconds. Its headlights swept across the platform, illuminating the North Warehouse door. No driver visible, no victims visible, no obvious activity. But the door, which had been ajar, twitched slightly the moment the headlights hit it. "Rewind again," an officer ordered. Rewind, slow motion, frame by frame advance. The door definitely moved, right when the Bronco stopped, not wind shake. The wind in frame at that moment was steady and light. This was motion from inside, or someone touching the door. A younger officer suggested, Run AI enhancement, not to invent new data, courts wouldn't accept that, but to clarify old pixels, boost contrast, reduce noise. The enhancement software processed the clip for an hour. The improved footage didn't reveal faces, but motion became clearer. The shadow appeared to be walking toward the warehouse door. The door twitched exactly when the Bronco appeared. A tiny movement at the door's edge, possibly a hand pulling it or something brushing against it, and in the very last second before the tape jammed, the image suddenly went black, and the screen twisted. There was one single frame, blurry but chilling. The shadow turned its head back toward the camera. No face visible, just the outline of head and shoulders, but unmistakably human. Then the tape stopped. It jammed at that exact second, as if someone had yanked the power cord, or the camera had been forcibly shut off right after recording something it wasn't supposed to record. No one in the room spoke further. No one had new proof. No one saw Nora or Emily on the video. But everyone knew this was no longer imagination. Someone had been inside the North warehouse the night the sisters vanished, and a white Bronco had been there at the exact same moment. A clue that had slept inside a broken camera for nearly 20 years, and now it was awake, dragging the entire Hale case with it. Finding the gray duffel bag in the North warehouse wall cavity, and extracting the old VHS footage didn't just breathe new life into the Hale case. It forced the Odessa Police Department to pull the file back to active review status, extremely rare for a disappearance over 20 years old. But what gripped the investigation room wasn't the scarf, the keychain, or the words 1029. She saw. It was the surface of the duffel bag itself, not because it was special, but because it might still hold traces that 1999 technology couldn't have analyzed. 2 decades earlier, the concept of touch DNA, analyzing DNA left by light contact, sweat, skin cells, was brand new and barely usable in court. But in 2019, it was one of modern forensics' most powerful tools. The question was immediate: who had touched the bag hidden in the wall for 20 years? The bag was sent to the Texas Department of Public Safety lab. Technicians in full protective gear opened it inside a sealed chamber to prevent contamination, then swabbed the handle, zipper edges, and every high contact area with specialized cotton tips. Each swab was coded, sealed, and fed into the analyzer. The process took days. No one dared hope for much. 20 years is long enough to degrade most samples, but the surprise came anyway. Enough skin cells remained to build profiles. Initial results arrived late in the week. The forensic tech called the cold case team in and handed them a printout showing 3 distinct DNA sequences. There were at least 3 people who touched this bag, she said. The team's first reaction was silence. No one expected the bag to carry that many traces, but the reality was undeniable. A duffel used only to hold a scarf, and a keychain had no reason to bear the touch of multiple people. Profile 1, female, matched Emily Hale's family reference DNA at a high confidence level. Not surprising. If the bag belonged to Emily, she had obviously handled it. Profile 2, male, no match to any Hale family member. No match to anyone the 1999 investigation had ever sampled. No hit in the entire Texas DNA database. This could be the person who hid the bag, or someone who touched it before it was hidden. This profile became the biggest question mark. An unknown male had handled Emily's duffel bag. When? Why? Profile 3. This was the one that made the room go completely still. Male. Strong enough sample for deep analysis, and most crucially, it was a 1-1 match to the DNA of a 1999 Odessa Station employee, Mark Venson. A long, very long silence fell over the lab. Mark Venson, that name wasn't unknown in the original file, but it had only ever been one entry on the station employee roster, never a primary suspect. In 1999, Venson was 27, worked the night maintenance shift. He quit in early 2000 and moved to long-haul trucking. No one had ever seen anything off about him. No conflicts, no record, no direct connection to Nora or Emily. Back in 1999, the team had interviewed Venson. He stated he left the station early that night because of a headache. No one could prove it false, and there was no reason to doubt him. Without cameras, without evidence, without clear signs of a crime, a night shift employee's word couldn't be treated as suspicious. But now, his DNA was on the duffel bag, and that bag had been hidden inside the north warehouse wall. If the bag was placed in the wall by someone who knew the station's layout, if the bag had to have been hidden very close to the night of the disappearance, and if Venson's profile was on the bag's handle, then every question circled back to one person, not a conclusion, not an accusation, just strong suspicion. The forensic tech continued deeper analysis, trying to pinpoint where on the bag each person's DNA was concentrated. More detailed results showed Michaelis Emily's DNA heaviest along the zipper edge. The unknown male profile on both ends of the handle, light contact, not prolonged. Mark Venson's DNA near the bottom of the bag, direct contact, not typical contamination. This strongly suggested Venson had touched the bag while it was still out in the open, before it was hidden in the wall. The cold case unit leader stared at the report, tension plain on his face. "We can't say what he did," he said, "but the fact is he touched it, and if the bag was deliberately hidden, someone knew this warehouse inside out." A younger officer, working the Hale case for the first time since reactivation, asked the question no one wanted to answer, but everyone was thinking, if Venson only touched the bag by chance, why was the bag inside the wall, and why was there a note that says she saw? No one answered. The meeting room fell as silent as the dust that once covered every corner of that old warehouse. Venson hadn't been at Odessa Station since the early 2000s. His record was clean. No priors, no serious work violations. Just a name that once appeared on a long 1999 night shift roster, but the existence of his DNA profile, on a duffel deliberately walled up, moved him from an ordinary employee to the first name in over 20 years, with a direct physical link to Hale case evidence. The team did not immediately issue a locate order. No one wanted to repeat the 1999 mistake of jumping without solid proof. What they had right now was a single thin thread, but unlike every thread in the past 20 years, this one was real, measurable, identifiable. When the report was closed, the cold case commander said one short sentence, "Our next step is clear, we have to find Mark Venson." No one objected, no one questioned it. Everyone understood that the Hale case, after 2 decades lying silent in the dark, had just found its strongest lead yet. Once the touch DNA results were in, the team knew they stood on the threshold of something no one had achieved in 20 years, determining movement and motive in the physical space of the night of October 11, 1999. Back then, the station lacked cameras strong enough to capture everything. But 2019 was different. Light data simulation, wind direction, platform lighting, and the old VHS camera angles could now reconstruct a night scene with near-perfect accuracy, using environmental metrics. Using the VHS tape, grainy, blurry, with only seconds of usable footage, plus the original station blueprints, the team decided to build a complete 3D model of the North Warehouse. Exact dimensions, exact camera angle, exact West Texas wind that night. The DPS Technical Analysis Lab built the model using software normally reserved for traffic accidents and violent crimes. The entire space was recreated. 1999 position of Cam 3, mounted 3.2 m high on the corner wall. Pile, yellow platform lighting, wind direction per weather records, southwest at 16 miles per hour. Pile, layout of the platform warehouse door, maintenance corridor, Nietzsche shadow cast by lights at every timestamp that night. The simulation team entered every parameter, every variable, every timestamp pulled from the VHS. That night the camera recorded in cycles, a few minutes of footage, then noise, then back, but it was enough to work with. When the 3D model was finished, the North Warehouse appeared on the large screen like a stage resurrected from memory. The old light poles, wooden crates on the left, narrow walkway along the wall, the metal door left ajar, all bathed in the murky yellow light of 1999. Step 1. Normalize VHS timestamp. Technicians extracted every frame, filtered noise, removed jitter, and stabilized playback speed. The jammed tape had made the clock jump wildly, but using the flicker rate of the lights and the angle of pole shadows, they pinned the usable segment at approximately 2 minutes 43 seconds, starting around 10:26 p.m. That number carried weight. The note in the duffel read, 10:29. She saw. No one in the room spoke when the two timestamps appeared, side by side. Step 2. Shadow analysis. Shadows don't lie. No matter how blurry the camera, shadows obey physics. Technicians input the exact light data from the eastern platform and north warehouse lamps per the 1999 diagram. The camera had captured the shadow of a human figure, moving right to left, then disappearing near the warehouse door. The simulation team inserted height models, 5555, 510, 62, and compared shadow shapes against the camera's magnification. After nearly 20 attempts, they determined the shadow belonged to someone approximately 5'9" inches to 6'0", far more likely male than average female height. No one claimed it was Mark Venson, but it was definitely not Nora or Emily, both much shorter. A third person had been there. Step 3. Wind direction and dust movement analysis. Southwest wind on October 11, 1999, was strong, pushing dust diagonally across the platform. When the wind flow was recreated in the 3D model, simulated dust particles matched the original video exactly, moving left to right relative to the camera, perfectly consistent with archived weather data. But one moment was anomalous. As the figure crossed in front of the camera, dust at foot level swirled against the wind for several seconds. This only happens when a force acts opposite the wind, or a moving object, creates minor turbulence that disrupts natural flow. The forensics team froze the frame. One technician said, "This isn't wind, this is footfall force, and it matches a fast walk, not a casual stroll." Another officer added, meaning the person was in a hurry, or pulling something. Step 4. Determine the shadow's destination. The original video showed the warehouse door twitch the instant the white Bronco appeared, but the footage was too blurry to see who moved it. The simulation team ran multiple scenarios, minus the person in the video touching the door, minus the person dragging something, minus the person entering the warehouse, minus the person waiting by the door. When the shadow's movement paths were overlaid with the door's motion angle, the 3D model produced a startling result. The person in the video stopped right at the door edge, turned their head toward the camera, just before the door twitched. That exact moment matched the final frame, before the tape jammed. One frame of a head and shoulders, no face. No detail, but unmistakably intentional behavior. No one wanted to say it out loud, but everyone thought the same thing. That person knew the camera was there. Step 5. Overlay timeline, using real data. By day's end, the simulation team combined every element, minus shadow appearance around 10:27, 10:28, white Bronco entry at 10:28, 10:29, light door twitch, final jammed frame, duffel note, 10:29. She saw, when all the data was layered on the big screen, a reconstructed timeline emerged clearer than any theory in the past 20 years. 1. 10:26, 10:27 p.m. A male shadow appears in the north platform corner. 2. 10:27, 10:28 p.m. The man walks quickly toward the warehouse door, footfalls creating dust swirl against the wind. 3. 10:28 p.m. Warehouse door twitches, unclear if open from inside or outside. 4. 10:28, 10:29 p.m. White Bronco enters frame, headlights sweep the warehouse door. 5. 10:29 p.m. Final frame, the shadow turns its head toward the camera. VHS tape jams at this exact second. 6. Note inside duffel, 10:29. She saw. No one said Emily saw him. No one declared this is when they were taken. No one dared claim certainty. But everyone understood that the miracle of 3D simulation had pushed the Hale case farther than any investigation in 2 decades. A third person was undeniably present at the North Warehouse at the exact moment the sisters vanished. and that person was connected to the white Bronco. The case was no longer they disappeared as if they never existed. No longer, no leads, no longer a story swallowed by time. The shadow had stepped out of the darkness, even if only as a blurry silhouette, and sometimes, in a cold case, a blurry shadow is enough to light up an entire investigation. When the Touch DNA report confirmed one of the 3 profiles belonged to Mark Venson, the atmosphere in the Odessa cold case unit changed completely. For 20 years the Hale case had felt like an endless dark tunnel, but now, for the first time, they had a name tied to real evidence, real data, a real connection, not loose statements or vague notes. The first person to suggest pulling the original file was Lieutenant Ramirez, who had worked records in the early 2000s. She opened the old safe, pulled out Mark Venson's thin folder, just a few interview sheets from 1999. No one expected a 20-year-old story to become the center of attention today. Mark Venson's contradictory statement. Mark Venson was first interviewed on October 13, 1999. 2 days after the disappearance, the hastily written statement, signed with a slightly shaky hand, read, "I left early because of a headache and dizziness, left the station around 10 p.m., but when cross-referenced with the 3D simulation data from earlier, the team spotted the anomaly. The shadow in the video appeared around 10:26, 10:27 p.m. If Mark truly left at 10 p.m., as he claimed, why was a male-shaped shadow of average height moving through the north warehouse area at 10:27? One officer said, cautiously but clearly, "No one is saying it's Mark. But one thing is certain, Mark cannot prove he left the station when he says he did." They found the note at the bottom of the 1999 interview page, almost forgotten. No witness to confirm Venson's departure time. In 1999, with no cameras, no evidence, no clear crime, that statement wasn't challenged. But in 2019, with DNA on the duffel, usable video, and the warehouse door clue, it became a gaping hole. The question arose, if Mark really left at 10 o'clock, his DNA shouldn't be on a duffel hidden after 10:26. If his DNA is on the duffel, it means Mark was in the warehouse area during that window, or at the very least, handled the bag under circumstances still unknown. Internal Disciplinary File 1998, 1999. In 1999, Mark Venson was just a low-paid night maintenance worker living alone in a small apartment south of Odessa. His initial personnel file was clean, until Ramirez pulled another thin folder from the cabinet. Internal Disciplinary Records, 1998, 1999. Nothing serious, but enough to raise eyebrows. In 1998, Mark received 2 minor warnings for leaving his assigned maintenance post without reporting. One note read, "Left the north area without reporting." In 1999, months before Nora and Emily vanished, Mark was reprimanded for being in the warehouse area after authorized hours. Official reason listed, checking cable equipment that lost signal. No one from the old management remembered the incidents clearly, but that note caught the team's attention. North Warehouse. The exact spot where the camera caught the shadow, the exact place the duffel was found 20 years later. Another piece fell into place. Mark had a habit of going into the warehouse. Mark had been disciplined for leaving his post unreported. Mark's DNA was on the duffel hidden in that warehouse wall. No one could prove motive or action, but the clues were lining up. Evidence of Mark Venson's presence that night in 1999. There were no cameras in the right places. No one remembered exactly what Mark did on shift, but in 2019, thanks to the 3D simulation, the team had comparison tools. The VHS shadow was roughly 5'9", 6'0". Mark stood 5'11", average male build, level shoulders, slightly forward-leaning gait, matching the description in his station personnel file. The footfalls in the video created strong dust swirls, consistent with the hurried movement noted in a 1999 internal supervisory report when Mark was warned for moving quickly in restricted areas. No one said it was Mark. No one could say it was, but everything placed Mark inside the time frame that 20 years ago couldn't be reconstructed. The team needed more, so they tracked down the 1999 night shift supervisor, Raymond Cole, now retired and living in Ector County. When asked about Mark again, Cole recalled, Mark he was always down in the warehouse, said he was checking wiring, lights flickering, but a lot of nights no one had asked him to be there. Do you remember the night Nora and Emily disappeared? The investigator asked. Cole thought for a long time, then answered, that night, there was something about the warehouse door. I remember telling someone not to leave it ajar, and I remember Mark was nearby when I did my final check. What time? I'm not sure, around 10:30 or a little after. The room went silent. 10:30. 10:29. The exact time on the duffel note. 10:28. The exact moment the white Bronco appeared in frame. Cole wasn't a perfect witness. Memory over 2 decades can slip, but he had just delivered a piece that matched every new data point. Mark did not leave the station at 10 p.m., as he claimed. Mark was near the warehouse around 10:30 p.m. That was the exact window when the sisters vanished. Mark's 2019 interview. When brought in for questioning in late 2019, Mark Venson appeared calm. He was over 40 now, a few gray hairs, living in a small town near Lubbock. Police asked the first question, have you ever touched a gray duffel bag? Mark frowned, looking confused. I don't think so. What bag? I don't know any bag. The investigator placed a photo of the bag in front of him. Mark was quiet for several seconds, then said, no, I've never seen this. The investigator continued, do you remember where you were between 10:20 and 10:40 p.m. on October 11, 1999? I already told you. I went home early, around 10. Can anyone confirm that? I don't remember. A long pause. Mark licked his lips out of habit and crossed his arms. Small movements, but they didn't escape the investigator. The investigator changed tactics. Mark, back then you were disciplined for being in the warehouse without reporting. Why? I was just doing my job. Checking cables. On the night of October 11th, were you near the warehouse door? Mark narrowed his eyes, tilted his head slightly. No, I was already gone. But at that moment, the investigator slid the 3D simulation printout across the table. The blurry shadow, tall figure, fast steps against the wind. Mark stared at it longer than normal. Who is this? We're asking you. Mark exhaled sharply, a flicker of unease, but he quickly regained composure. I don't know. I left at 10. That's what I remember. Everything now pointed to one central question, not because Mark had a record, not because anyone accused him, not because there was proof he was ever with Nora or Emily, but because Mark's DNA was on the duffel hidden in the wall. Mark had a history of entering the warehouse without official reason. Mark could not prove when he left the station. The night supervisor remembered Mark near the warehouse around 10:30. The video shadow matched Mark's height and gait. The lead investigator wrote one short line in the internal report, Mark Venson is no longer outside this story, and from that moment on, the Hale case entered a new phase, a phase where every question revolved around a single point. What did Mark Venson do at the North Warehouse on the night of October 11, 1999? When Mark Venson became the first standout name in over 20 years, the team knew they couldn't rely solely on DNA, a blurry shadow on video, or one retired supervisor's fragmented memory. They had to go back to the beginning, the 3 original 1999 witness statements, the accounts once seen as critical pieces for sketching the sisters' final moments, yet so contradictory, they had paralyzed the initial investigation. When the cold case was reactivated, no one thought the old statements would still matter. The truth turned out to be the opposite. Precisely because they were old, they might contain cracks no one noticed in 1999. And when the team began re-examining each statement, the broken pieces of truth started forming a completely different picture. Witness #1, the non-existent taxi driver. The man who claimed to be a 1999 night shift taxi driver had stated he saw 2 women walking toward the platform and a man carrying a duffel bag walking the opposite way. At the time, that statement was treated as the most important lead, even though no one else saw the man with the bag. When the team pulled the old file in the 2019 records system, they found a note, address invalid, identity unverified. They checked 1999 resident records, no one matched the name. They cross-referenced every night taxi driver registered in Odessa Midland and Ector County. no match. None of the taxi companies from that era remembered anyone fitting the description. No one knew who he was. No ID, no license plate, no camera ever captured him. He stepped out of the darkness, said a few words, then vanished. A young officer stared at the caseboard and said what everyone was thinking but no one had dared say 20 years earlier. He may never have existed, not meaning he was a ghost, not meaning anything supernatural, but rather someone may have used a fake name, fake address, fake identity, for the sole purpose of pulling police attention away from Odessa Station. A new question emerged. Why try to pull the investigation away from the scene? Why emphasize the duffel bag? Now they knew the duffel had been hidden inside the wall, and a mystery man in 1999 had also mentioned a duffel bag, two pieces 20 years apart, yet terrifyingly identical. Witness #2, the older woman walking her dog who got the location wrong. The elderly woman claimed she saw two women walking with a man near the North Warehouse. Her statement once made police suspect the sisters had left with someone they knew, but during the 3D reconstruction, an undeniable fact surfaced. Anyone standing where she said she was, near the west fence facing the warehouse, could not possibly have seen the warehouse door because it was completely blocked by the old row of containers. In 1999, that row of containers was still there, used for storing rail repair equipment. The team measured distances, recreated the 1999 sightlines, and confirmed witness #2's line of sight was impossible, completely impossible. Even standing flush against the fence, the container shadows still blocked the entire angle. That meant, either she misremembered the spot, or her memory had shifted over time, or someone had prompted her to describe it that way. There was no proof she deliberately lied, no reason an elderly woman would interfere with a case, but the fact remained, her statement was inaccurate, and it had once pushed the investigation toward the left with an acquaintance theory. That misdirection caused the 1999 team to overlook a critical possibility. The man in the darkness wasn't walking with them, he was waiting there. Witness #3, the statement deliberately sent the investigation off course. The worker who said he saw Nora and Emily walking straight toward the east parking lot, not turning toward the warehouse, not meeting anyone. The original report treated this as the most reliable testimony, because he was on scene. But in 2019, when the cold case team pulled payroll records from his company, they were stunned. He was not on the night shift on October 11, 1999. According to payroll, he had taken that day off. The lead investigator said, so why was he even at the station? When they tracked the man down now living in New Mexico, he initially seemed confused, then said he might have mixed up the date, or might have been passing through to grab food. But when asked for details about where he was standing, when he saw the women heading to the parking lot, he gave a completely different location from his 1999 statement. Inconsistent, illogical, baseless. And when cross-checked against the 3D simulation, the team discovered something far worse. From the spot he described in 1999, it was impossible to see the area Nora and Emily walked through. Completely impossible. This led a veteran detective to conclude, this isn't just wrong, this is wrong on purpose. Why would someone deliberately lie? Had someone told him to say that? Did he know anyone on the 1999 station employee roster? The answer sent a chill down their spines. He had worked the same shift as Mark Venson for the first 6 months of 1999. No one claimed they were accomplices, no one jumped to conclusions, but that coincidence could not be ignored. The team wrote in the internal report, witness #3 likely provided intentionally false testimony, purpose to pull the investigation toward the parking lot and away from the North Warehouse. The North Warehouse, the exact place where the camera captured a shadow, the door was left ajar, the white Bronco appeared, and the duffel bag was hidden in the wall. 3 statements, 3 arrows aimed off target. After full analysis, the team concluded, witness #1, non-existent, likely fabricated or using false identity. Witness #2, wrong location, physically impossible to see what she described. Witness #3, deliberately misleading testimony, and connected to Mark Venson. Something happened in 1999 that caused at least one statement to be distorted. No one knew who orchestrated it, No one knew the goal, but all three statements, if believed, had the same effect. They turned the North Warehouse into an irrelevant area. 20 years later, every piece of evidence pointed straight to that warehouse. No one on the cold case team still called it coincidence. The Hale case had awakened, and the truth was slowly clawing its way to the surface, as sluggish and difficult as the shadowy figure in that grainy old VHS tape. Early February 2020, after 6 straight months of investigation, the Odessa Police Department and the Ector County DA's office agreed to take a step no one had imagined 20 years earlier. File for an arrest warrant for Mark Venson, not because they were certain he committed the crime, but because every link, from touch DNA, to the 3D reconstruction, to the dissected 1999 statements, pointed to one clear fact: Mark Venson had to explain his presence on the night of October 11, 1999. The warrant was signed the morning of February 9, a short but heavy order: temporary arrest, suspected obstruction of investigation and contact with evidence in the Hale disappearance. No one called it a major charge. No one said it was the end, but it was a step forward. The Hale case had never taken in 20 years. The approach in Lubbock. Mark Venson lived on the second floor of an old apartment complex in East Lubbock. When the Ector County Task Force and Lubbock PD arrived, the sky was still half dark. Fog clung to the railing, cold wind rattled nearby signs, a scene eerily similar to the night at Odessa Station, when they vanished. Mark opened the door after 2 knocks. No panic, no questions, no attempt to run, just surprise, then silence. Mark Venson, you are under arrest, pursuant to an Ector County warrant related to the 1999 Hale disappearance. Mark lowered his head for several seconds, then slowly raised his hands, as if he had long expected this day, or had lived with that fear for 20 years. As the cuffs clicked behind his back, Mark spoke his first sentence of the morning: "This won't help anything." No one answered. He was led to the car. Interrogation room, the first crack. In the Odessa interrogation room, Mark sat across from the lead investigator. White lights reflected off the metal table, making the space feel as cold as the old frozen file storage. The investigator began. "Mark, you know why you're here." "I didn't kill them." Mark's voice was strangely calm. "I didn't take them either." "No one said you did. We're asking about your presence at the North Warehouse, around 10:30 p.m. Mark froze. The silence stretched so long the air seemed to thicken. "I already told you, I left at 10. You said that in 1999. No one can confirm it. And the 3D reconstruction shows a person your height in the exact area you worked nights." The warehouse door moves. A white Bronco appears. "The duffel has your DNA." Mark stared at the table. His fingers tapped the metal surface, slow and perfectly even, an old habit, perhaps a sign he was hiding something. The investigator continued. "Mark, you told us you had a headache and went home early, but the night supervisor remembers you near the warehouse around 10:30. Do you want to revise your statement?" Mark closed his eyes. A heavy breath escaped. "It wasn't me." The investigator leaned forward. "Wasn't you what, Mark? What are you trying to say?" Mark opened his eyes, and for the first time looked straight at the investigator. In his gaze was something strange, not fear, but regret mixed with torment, as if he stood before a choice he had dodged for years. "I wasn't the only one there." The room dropped into absolute silence. That sentence, deliberate, pointed, cut through the air like a blade. The investigator asked slowly, "Not the only one means what?" Mark didn't answer immediately. He leaned back in the chair, hands clasped, eyes fixed on a distant spot on the wall. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. The person you need to find isn't me. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Mark, who else was there with you?" Mark looked down at his hands, voice so low it was almost to himself. "I can't say, I can't." The investigator shifted tone. "Mark, do you realize what your words just opened up? You're admitting you know another person was there that night." Mark gave a dry, bitter laugh, but the smile was pure fear. "I know, and that's why you'll never find that person." No one understood what he meant, not yet. But that sentence made the entire team freeze for several seconds, as if they could feel another crack appear in the case's wall. Baffling behavior, Not like a guilty man, not like an innocent one. Mark didn't lawyer up right away, he didn't fight the questions, he didn't double down on lies. He acted like someone trapped inside a story bigger than himself, and trying to hide something not just for his own sake. The investigator asked the final question of the session. Mark, who are you protecting? Mark shook his head. I'm not protecting, I'm staying away. Staying away from what? Mark swallowed. His answer sent a chill through the investigator. Staying away from the person who was by the warehouse that night. The investigator pressed. Who is that person? Mark replied. I already told you, I wasn't the only one there. One arrest, and a bigger mystery. The arrest of Mark Venson was not the ending. It opened another door, a door leading to a question that had barely been asked in 20 years. If Mark wasn't the only one there, then who was the other person? No witness record, no name, no description, no DNA, no trace on the video. Only a blurry shadow, and Mark's words. Words powerful enough to shake the entire Hale case. I wasn't the only one there. And from that point, the case moved into its most dangerous phase, the phase where the remaining unknown person might realize the police were closing in. Immediately after Mark Venson's bombshell, I wasn't the only one there. The lead investigator filed an emergency search warrant request for his residence. It was approved within 2 hours. No one in the room believed Mark had told the full truth, but no one still saw him as a harmless witness. What he had just said didn't just contradict his 1999 statement, it opened the possibility of a second figure, someone who had stood with Mark at the North Warehouse the night the Hale sisters disappeared. The two-story house Mark lived in on the east side of Lubbock wasn't large, but the officers were prepared for anything hidden in any corner that might answer 20 years of mystery. When the search team arrived, the afternoon light was already fading. The weak glow hit the front of the house, making the old bricks shine a dull yellow, the same shade as the platform lights at Odessa Station in 1999. The door was opened with the spare key taken from Mark. The interior stopped them dead in their tracks. Mark's house was almost empty. No pictures, no photos, no personal items, nothing that showed a normal daily life, just an old sofa, a wooden table, and a few cardboard boxes lined up against the wall, as if Mark had always lived ready to leave at a moment's notice, like someone living temporarily. No roots, no desire to leave traces. The officers split up by area. The space was small, but the strange feeling was thick, like someone had tried to erase every sign of themselves but hadn't been thorough enough. And sure enough, only minutes after entering the bedroom, they found the first piece of evidence. Torn red jacket, a detail never mentioned in the original file. In the back of the closet, behind a few winter coats, an officer pulled out a dark red fabric jacket with a tear at one shoulder, the stitching ripped as if it had been yanked hard or caught on metal. What made everyone freeze wasn't the red color, it was a patch of fine gray dust clinging to the fabric, exactly the kind of dust blown through the Odessa Station warehouse in 1999. Police sealed it immediately. The red jacket had never appeared in any original evidence description. No one had mentioned red clothing. No witness had reported seeing anyone in red, yet it was hidden in the deepest part of the closet, not everyday wear, but something deliberately stashed away. This raised three possibilities. Mark wore it that night. The jacket tore from contact with the warehouse door or metal wall, or the jacket belonged to the third person Mark had mentioned, all of them dangerous. Expired station access card, invalid since 2000 in an old wooden desk drawer. An officer found a white plastic card printed with the 1999 Railroad Company logo, Odessa Transit Authority. It was a station access badge issued to night maintenance workers. Printed on it, Venson Mark, Level 2 access. The surprise was on the back. The barcode had been scratched off, as if someone had tried to erase it. One officer whispered, "He was supposed to turn this in when he quit. Why does he still have it?" Venson left the job in February 2000. The badge should have been surrendered per policy. If Mark kept it, that meant he could still enter non-public areas of the station after he was gone. This opened a terrifying possibility. Venson may have returned to the station multiple times after 1999, possibly to hide the duffel bag, or to meet someone. Meaning he wasn't just connected to the moment of disappearance, he might be tied to whatever happened afterward. City drainage system map, spine-chilling in a taped-up old cardboard box. The search team found something no one expected, a 1998 printed map of the Odessa city drainage system, with large pipes marked that ran parallel to the rail lines. It wasn't something a regular station maintenance worker would ever need. Even more telling, one route was highlighted in black ink, running from the north warehouse to the area near the east parking lot. Another spot was circled in red ink directly beneath the warehouse floor, the exact place the duffel bag was discovered 20 years later. One officer said quietly, a chill running down his spine, "No one has a reason to own this, unless they were going places they weren't allowed." This map raised huge questions. Was there an access point under the warehouse back then? Who had keys or permission? What did Mark use the map for? The lead investigator wrote in his notebook, "Map opens possibility of an underground movement route, never considered in 1999. From the parking lot under the station to the warehouse, a path no one on the original team had ever thought of." 1999 El Paso train ticket. The lie about a left the station collapses in the second drawer of the metal desk where Mark kept personal papers. An officer found a small paper train ticket to El Paso stamped, the 12th of October 1999, 1:45 a.m., the day after the disappearance. No purchaser name, but the seat number was intact. The ticket was used, torn at one corner. Why had Mark kept a 20-year-old used train ticket? Police couldn't ignore the timing. Mark claimed he left the station around 10 p.m., but the 1999 ticket showed Mark could have still been near Odessa Station until at least 1:45 a.m., catching a train toward El Paso. If Mark boarded the 1:45 a.m. train, he had been in the station area nearly 4 hours after the Hale sisters vanished. That completely destroyed his 1999 statement. All the evidence, a picture that doesn't match Mark's words. When every item was laid out on the steel table in the evidence room, the investigators stood around it in silence, but in that silence, everyone understood what was taking shape. The Hale case was not a simple disappearance, it was more complicated, wider and layered deeper than anyone had ever imagined. 4 pieces of evidence, each opening a new question: torn red jacket physical trace, suggesting struggle or contact inside the warehouse. Expired station access card, Mark retained access to the station after leaving the job. Drainage system map possibility of an underground route, never investigated. 1999, El Paso train ticket obliterates the claim, "I left at 10. All of them pointed to one common conclusion: Mark Venson knew far more than he was saying. And the third person he mentioned might be the central figure the case had been searching for over 2 decades. Looking at those 4 items, the lead investigator said something no one disputed: "We're no longer investigating one man, we're investigating a network." The Hale case hadn't just been reopened, it was about to explode. The trial in the disappearance of Nora and Emily Hale took place in the fall of 2020 at the Ector County Courthouse. The air inside the courtroom was thick with tension. Although Mark Venson was not charged with murder, there were no bodies, no cause of death, and no one dared declare it. The charges against him were still serious: obstruction of justice, concealment of evidence, knowingly providing false statements, and direct involvement in hiding the whereabouts of missing persons. Legally, the prosecution only had to prove Mark played a role in covering up a crime, not that he committed the original act. But to the public, everyone understood this was the first trial to shed light on what really happened the night of October 11, 1999. The courtroom fell almost completely silent when the prosecutor stood with a binder nearly 3 inches thick. He began, "We don't have bodies. But we have something more important, a chain of 21 undeniable forensic points, all leading to the presence and role of the defendant, Mark Venson, on the night 2 women vanished." The prosecutor's chain of 21 points, the strongest foundation of the case. The prosecutor presented each point slowly but sharply, stitching the 20-year gap into one continuous chain of events. Point 1. Mark was present at the station on the night of October 11, 1999, contrary to his original statement. Point 2. The claim left the station at 10 p.m. was never corroborated by anyone. Point 3. 3D reconstruction shows a person 5'9", at the North Warehouse between 10:27, 10:28 p.m. Point 4. Mark is 5'11", 0.5, The shadow in the video has a gait matching Mark's personnel file description. Point 6. The warehouse door twitches the exact moment the white Bronco appears. Point 7. This was an area Mark frequently entered without reason in 1998, 1999 per internal disciplinary records. Point 8. The duffel bag was hidden behind a wall, accessible only to someone familiar with the warehouse structure. Point 9. Touch DNA on the bag reveals 3 profiles: Emily, an unidentified male, and Mark. Point 10. Mark's DNA is located at the bottom of the bag, direct contact. Point 11. Mark illegally retained his station access card, could enter the station after quitting. Point 12. Torn red jacket carries dust, consistent with the metal dust in the warehouse area. Point 13. 1998 city drainage map with routes marked from the warehouse to the parking lot. Point 14. El Paso train ticket for 1:45 a.m. Mark was still at near the station hours after the disappearance. Point 15. Mark gave false location, false timing and false details in all 3 interviews. Point 16. Night shift supervisor remembers seeing Mark near the warehouse door around 10:30 p.m. Point 17. One witness #3 deliberately gave false testimony and had worked the same shift as Mark. Point 18. Witness #1 does not exist, likely fabricated to mislead the investigation. Point 19. Witness #2 gave an impossible statement, her vantage point could not see the described area. Point 20. The note 1029 she saw was inside the duffel bearing Mark's DNA. Point 21. Mark's own words in the 2020 interrogation: "I wasn't the only one there." When the prosecutor reached point 21, the courtroom practically froze. Even without bodies, no one could deny it. Mark had been there at the most critical moment of the case. Defense counterattack: no body, no crime. When it was their turn, the defense attorney stepped to the lectern with cold confidence. Their strategy had been clear from the start: attack the prosecution's biggest hole: no actual crime scene, no bodies, no direct evidence of violence. The attorney began, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, remember the most important fact: this is a missing persons case, not a murder case. No bodies have been found. No one has proven a crime occurred. No one has proven Nora or Emily were harmed." They then dismantled each piece of the forensic chain. DNA could have transferred innocently. The video is too blurry for identification. The reconstruction is simulation, not direct evidence. The drainage map could be a personal interest. The train ticket doesn't prove Mark committed a crime. A torn jacket doesn't prove criminal conduct. Then came the carefully prepared closing line: "In American law, we do not convict on assumptions. No body means no proof of death, and without death, there is no crime." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. This argument was familiar. It had collapsed countless missing persons cases in court before, but the prosecutor only gave a thin smile. He replied, "Correct. This is a disappearance. But Texas law is clear: intentionally concealing the whereabouts of a missing person is a felony. And we have undeniable forensic proof the defendant did exactly that." Forensic timeline: the prosecution's strongest weapon. The prosecution didn't need to prove Mark caused anyone's death. They only needed to prove Mark was there. Mark knew what happened. Mark did something to cover it up. And the 20-year forensic timeline, rebuilt with modern technology, was too strong to rebut. The prosecutor played the 3D simulation for the jury. The lights dimmed. The large screen showed a 5960 shadow moving quickly across the platform. The ajar warehouse door twitching. The white Bronco's headlights sweeping the metal surface. One final frame before the tape jammed. Then the prosecutor said, "You are looking at 10:28 p.m., the moment Mark Venson cannot prove he had left the station." Next he held up the sealed duffel bag, and continued, "And this is the item Mark touched. Hidden inside a wall, only someone who knew the warehouse layout could have placed it there." Defense counsel shook his head. "No body." The prosecutor cut in sharply. "No body, correct. But there is concealment, contradictory statements, evidence hidden in a wall, DNA, an illegally retained access card, a drainage map, a 1:45 a.m. train ticket, and a witness who deliberately lied. He stepped closer to the jury box and spoke slowly. And there is the one sentence an innocent person never says: I wasn't the only one there. The courtroom went dead quiet. No one could deny the truth. The forensic timeline, body or no body, formed an unbroken chain of logic that no crime arguments could not shatter. End of trial. The case is not over. That day's trial was only the beginning. Mark was found guilty of concealing evidence and intentionally obstructing the investigation, but not of causing anyone's death. As the jury delivered the verdict, Mark simply stared at the table, silent, as if the words he had uttered in interrogation still hung in the air. I wasn't the only one there, and when the trial ended, the prosecution felt no victory, because the trial had proven something far bigger. If Mark wasn't the only one there, then the other person, the one standing in the shadows of that VHS tape, was still out there. The Hale case did not end here. It had only entered its most dangerous chapter. The trial closed, but the Hale case did not. On the investigation table, every item recovered between 2019 and 2020, the duffel bag, the touch DNA samples, the VHS tape, the red jacket, the access card, the drainage map, the El Paso train ticket, formed a clear logical structure. Yet every time the team thought they were close to the truth, another detail appeared that bent the straight line into a curve, turning clarity back into deeper mystery. The biggest reason the case remained open was not Mark Venson, not the white Bronco, not the shadow on the video. It was the unidentified female DNA profile found in the touch DNA analysis on the duffel bag. Female DNA, not a Hale family member. When the full touch DNA analysis was completed, the report showed 3 profiles. Emily Hale match. Mark Venson match. One unidentified female, not Nora, not any relative, no hit in CODIS. The forensic file stated clearly: female subject unrelated to victims, identity unknown. Not a station employee, not an old witness, not anyone known to Nora or Emily. A woman with no name in the case, who had nonetheless touched the duffel directly linked to Emily. Why a woman? Why had no one ever mentioned a third woman? Why did her DNA appear nowhere else? The only certainty: a woman had handled the bag before it was sealed inside the wall. A veteran investigator wrote bluntly in the report. Mark said he wasn't the only one there. The touch DNA proves he wasn't lying. Old statements, far more inconsistencies than imagined. When police re-examined every 1999 statement, they uncovered additional absurdities that earlier technology couldn't have caught. Inconsistency #1. Witness #2 could not have seen the North Warehouse. The 3D simulation proved her view was completely blocked. Her claim, "I saw 3 people walk into the warehouse," collapsed entirely. If she didn't see it, who told her that story? Inconsistency #2. Witness #3 worked the same shift as Mark. He gave false location and timing, and internal records proved he was not even on duty that night. What was he hiding, or who was he hiding for? Inconsistency #3. Witness #1 does not exist. A taxi driver with no name in the resident registry, no record in tax files, no vehicle registration, no trace in any local record from that year. This person fabricated an identity, and the only detail he provided was the duffel bag, the exact piece of evidence that surfaced 20 years later inside the warehouse wall. Too much coincidence to be accidental, too precise to be a mistake. Police wrote in the report, an individual created a false statement about a duffel bag immediately after the disappearance. In 2019, the duffel bag appeared inside the wall. This cannot simply be coincidence. Venson convicted, but the case remains open. Mark Venson was sentenced for concealing evidence, intentionally misleading the investigation, unauthorized retention and use of station access after termination, providing false statements in successive investigations. He was sent to prison, but Mark revealed nothing more. He refused to name the third person. He never admitted to harming Nora or Emily. Throughout the months, he repeated only one sentence: "I wasn't the only one there, I can't say anything more." This left the trial ending on a strange, heavy note. The convicted man was not the sole perpetrator. The other person remained hidden in the shadows, and the only remaining lead was a nameless female DNA profile that appeared and vanished like a ghost. The fourth presence, a figure never mentioned in any statement. Police labeled this mystery person the fourth presence because 1. Nora 2. Emily 3. Mark and an unnamed female present in the timeline. No one knows where she came from. No one knows why she touched the duffel bag. No one knows what her role was that night. She does not appear on the video. She does not appear in any statement. She does not appear on the employee roster. She does not appear in station records. She does not appear in the victims' lives. But the DNA is clear. She was there. One investigator commented in the file, if Mark wasn't the only one in the warehouse, then the other person wasn't a man. We are dealing with a figure never named in 20 years. Open ending. The silence of that night at Odessa Station, when the final trial proceedings concluded, the Hale file was partially closed, but not locked. The case was reclassified, open, seeking unidentified female contact. No one knows who that woman is. No one knows her motive. No one knows whether she was directly involved in the disappearance of the Hale sisters. But everything from the touch DNA to Mark's final words points to the same hazy truth. On the night of October 11, 1999, at the North Warehouse of Odessa Station, there were more than 3 people. The final question, the one no one had answered in 20 years, the one that weighed on every investigator in that cold file room, the one the entire Odessa community still whispered whenever they passed that windswept platform, remained unanswered. Who was there with Nora and Emily that night? In the story of the 1999 disappearance at Odessa Station, what haunts us is not just the vanishing of Nora and Emily Hale, but the 20 long years their family, the community, and the justice system wrestled with the silence of one dusty Texas night. Details like the duffel bag hidden behind a wall, the jammed VHS tape, the touch DNA revealing 3 profiles, or Mark Venson's words, "I wasn't the only one there," show that in today's America, justice doesn't always come quickly, but it can come if the community, science, and individual vigilance never let go. The first lesson is the importance of technology and data preservation. A useless VHS tape in 1999 became a crucial piece in 2019, reminding us that in the digital age, storing and respecting old data can save an entire life. The second lesson, never ignore unusual behavior. Mark keeping his station access card after quitting or owning a city drainage map weren't small details. They are reminders to every American that community safety begins with staying alert to anything that feels off around us. Finally, the story underscores the value of persistence and transparency. The Hale family never gave up, and that very persistence, combined with modern forensics, pulled the case out of the darkness. In a vast America, where more than 600,000 people are reported missing each year, the Odessa story reminds us that truth can be buried, but it never disappears, as long as someone keeps searching. Thank you for joining this chilling journey through Odessa Station 1999. If you want to keep exploring unsolved mysteries still open across America, hit subscribe and turn on notification. See you in the next video, where we'll continue following Trace's time once thought it had buried forever.